Wendy Simpson sat in the chair, looking around. Until a few minutes ago, she had been in the bedroom she shared with her husband, Reggie, who had lived with her for 5 years. Strange, she thought. She couldn't remember exactly what she was doing. It was like she was there 1 second, and then here the next. How had that happened? She looked around the room. There were no windows, and she couldn't see where the door might be. There was no obvious source of light, but the room was flooded with an almost overwhelming white light that seemed to come from everywhere. Everything in the room was white. The short robe she wore, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the chair she was sitting in, and the table in front of her. Strange, she thought. There were no shadows anywhere. She felt a little stuffy in the room, and droplets of sweat appeared on her forehead. She wiped the sweat away with the sleeve of her robe. Finally, the door opened, and a thin man in a white suit and tie came to the desk. He sat down, opened the folder, and placed it on the desk in front of him. Before he looked at her, he looked inside the folder. He looked at her bare legs, her long blonde hair cascading down over her shoulders, and the bulge of her breasts. She was very beautiful indeed. In another universe, he could have played for her himself. What a waste, he thought to himself. Wendy Simpson, he said. Is that right? He watched as she nodded. Please answer yes or no, he added. Yes, she said. I'm Wendy Simpson. Where am I? What am I doing here? He smiled briefly before answering. He had seen this hundreds of thousands of times. No, definitely millions of times. You really don't know, do you? He asked. She shook her head. No, I don't know, she replied. It's all right, he said. It's perfectly normal. You'll find out soon enough. It's pretty warm in here, she said. Can I get a glass of ice water or something? He smiled before answering. Actually, I think it's a little chilly in here, he said. Besides, they don't serve soft drinks here. Trust me, there are plenty of people here who would love a glass of ice water, he added with a slight chuckle. He always liked to say that to newcomers. Now let's get down to business. You seem to have been a very naughty little girl, he said. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment before he spoke. Don't ever apologize, he said firmly. It's too late to apologize anyway, and believe me, apologies will go unheeded anyway. All I ask is that you don't judge me, she said. I know I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to be good. I'm not here to judge you, he said. You've already been judged. I'm here to determine what level to put you on. Now let's get down to business. The entire wall changed, and Wendy felt like she was watching a giant movie of her life. As a child, you disobeyed your parents repeatedly and lied to them more than once, he said. The movie changed scenes as he spoke, reflecting the events he mentioned. All pretty standard stuff. You were 12 years old when you stole this little trinket from the little village store you visited with your mother. Do you remember it? Yes, she answered. I thought no one could see me. He grinned. That's what everyone says, he said. You were very active and had 3 abortions by the time you got to college, and the last one was so botched that the doctors had to cut out your tubes. You were what, almost 19 at the time? You never told your husband about that, did you? Oh my God, she said. When they first got married, she told her husband that she had female problems that prevented her from getting pregnant. He bought her lies, hook, line, and sinker, and never pressed her for more information. Did you know all of this? He looked at her sternly, and his face turned dark red. Don't ever mention that name here, miss. Do you understand? She nodded her head. Yes, she said. I understand. She quickly pulled herself together, realizing she was about to apologize. He turned again to the folder in front of him, and his face took on a more normal color. Let's see, he said, picking up where he left off. By the time you graduated high school, you'd had sex with almost every boy in your class. The only thing that kept you out of trouble was the fact that you were over 18. In fact, the only reason you graduated was because you slept with one of your teachers for a passing grade. She remembered that incident. She didn't do too well in high school, mostly because she was too busy partying with the soccer team. Her English teacher, Mr. Ross, was a young, good-looking bachelor, so one day after school, she cornered him and begged him to give her a second chance. He told her it was too late, but assured her he might be willing to give her a passing grade in exchange for sex. By then, she was over 18. He gave her a B, which ensured her graduation. "You kept it up the whole time you were in college," the man said. "You had a reputation as a party girl and an available lover. Then you started using drugs and participated in numerous gangbangs. Frankly, I'm surprised you actually graduated. It was then that you met Reginald Simpson, a man who unfortunately became your husband." She remembered meeting Reggie in the common room. He was such a handsome young man with dreams of the future. He treated her like a queen. In his eyes, she was a goddess in so many ways. She thought she could change her life if only he would marry her. They dated for several months before he popped the question. Naturally, she said yes, and they got married. "You promised to be exclusive with him, but you couldn't, could you?" the man asked. "In fact, you had sex with all the male strippers at the bachelorette party, even 3 at a time." As he spoke, a videotape of her party was spinning on the wall. "Truth be told, it took a few days before you turned to poor Reggie for sex, didn't it?" the man asked. She nodded shamefacedly as he looked at her intently. "Yes, it was," she said. "There's nothing to be ashamed of," the man said. "What's done is done. It's too late to take any of it back." He turned back to his folder, and the video changed as he spoke. "Let's see," he said. "On your wedding day, you managed to screw your husband's best man just minutes before you walked down the aisle." She remembered that day and how dirty she'd felt when she'd done it. "Just a little bit," she replied meekly. "He was your husband's best friend, wasn't he?" "Yes, he was," she answered. "And poor Reggie never found out?" the man asked. Wendy shook her head. "No, he didn't find out," she said. "You managed to remain faithful to your husband throughout the honeymoon, but you went back to your old tricks pretty quickly," the man said. "After you were hired as a legal secretary, you started flirting with men in your office and had sex with several of them over the next few months. You even brought them to your house when Reggie was away on business trips, didn't you?" "Yes," she replied. "You were really cheating on your husband, weren't you?" the man asked. "He never knew. Never suspected anything, even when you gave him sloppy seconds. He thought I was really horny for him when he came back from his trips," she said. "He never suspected." "That's because that ignorant idiot loved you," the man said. "Meanwhile, you were laughing to yourself, weren't you? You liked your power over him, didn't you? You could tell him anything and he'd believe you." "I think so," she said. In truth, the man was right. She often laughed to herself when she thought about how she had cheated on her husband. All the time they had been married, she had thought she had gotten away with cheating. "But the truth is, you hated him, didn't you? I mean, he worked his ass off for the two of you while you slept with everything that moved." "I didn't hate him," she said. "I loved him, just in a different way." "Bullshit," the man said. "You forget that we know everything, even the thoughts that went through your head. You didn't respect him. You thought he was a weakling who would never be as rich and powerful as the men you had fun with. He was just a living doll to you, something to help you between sex with your lovers. In fact, you thought of him as just a stepping stone until you caught someone else who could give you the life you really wanted. Isn't that the truth? Don't even think about lying to me. We already know what was on your mind." "Good," Wendy said, surprised that this man knew so much about her and what she really thought of her ignorant, horny husband. "I admit it," she added, and tears ran down her cheeks. "Stop crying," the man said, disgusted with her. "It's too late for regrets. You've made your choice and now you're paying the piper." "Don't I have another chance?" she asked. "Please? I'll make it up to him, I promise." The man laughed before answering. "Give me a break," he said. "What? Do you think this is some kind of reality show or something? You've had a lifetime of second chances, and you've missed them every time. Maybe there's something I can do or give you to change your mind, she began, unzipping her robe so he could look at her smooth flesh. I know this is what you want. What every man wants. Then he laughed. Do you really think you can do it? He asked. Come on, try a little if you can. She reached out and tried to wrap both hands around the giant creature, but suddenly recoiled, her hands burning as if she had touched acid. She looked down and saw red marks where she had touched it. He laughed. What's the matter? Too hot to handle? He asked, laughing madly. Wendy leaned back in her chair, feeling defeated. For the first time in her memory, she couldn't satisfy a man. She stared at the wall, watching videos of her many flirtations. It seemed to go on forever, never ending. For the first time in her memory, she truly hoped to see a commercial. Anything, just to stop what was playing. She watched a video of the company's last Christmas party, the one she had attended with her husband, being shown on the wall. After slipping the poor man a sleeping pill to make him sleep and some drugs, she had gone off with 3 of her male co-workers and fucked them all in one of the rooms set aside by the company for partygoers who were too drunk to drive. After they were all done, she slipped back into the party, woke her husband, and drove him home. She remembered laughing about it the whole time. She also continued to have fun about it the next day when she was at work, talking about it and joking around with the 3 men she had entertained. To tell you the truth, you were pretty cruel to your husband, weren't you? The man asked. Thinking about it, she realized that she had been cruel to the only man who loved her unconditionally. Yes, she answered quietly. Do you know how your husband eventually figured it out? The man asked. Wendy shook her head. No, I don't, she replied. He caught a good venereal disease from you, the man said. He found a substitute at work, took the day off, and went to his doctor. After he got the test results proving he had an STD, he went home to meet you. Imagine his surprise when he walked into the house and heard you and your lover having fun in your bedroom. Tell me, do you remember the last few minutes before you got here? Wendy thought about it, but couldn't remember anything. No, I don't remember, she answered. No problem, he said. That's quite normal considering what happened. Let me jog your memory a little. As she stared at the wall, the video changed. Then she suddenly remembered what had happened. She was at home with one of her co-workers. To be precise, she was in her bedroom, naked on the bed she shared with her husband, on all fours, while her lover, Jake, kissed her. While they were having fun, her husband appeared in the bedroom. She didn't realize he was there until she looked up and found herself looking into the muzzle of a very large and powerful gun. Reggie had a large collection of guns that he kept under lock and key, rifles, pistols, shotguns, whatever. He silently cocked the trigger and pulled the trigger. The last thing she remembered was a loud gunshot and a flash from the muzzle. The video on the wall showed what happened to her head, which basically exploded when the bullet penetrated her skull. The next bullet hit Jake in the groin. Wendy began to shake as she watched the video. This can't be happening, she said, tears streaming down her face. It didn't really happen, did it? Oh, yes, it happened, the man said. That means I'm dead, she sobbed. Please tell me this isn't happening. Yes, it's happening, the man said. It's happening. What about Jake and my husband? She asked. It's a little late to worry about him, the man said. But since you asked, your lover ended up in the hospital. He'll live. He's lost a good chunk of his dignity and won't make babies, but that's probably a good thing. Your husband realized what he'd done and pointed the gun at himself. Is he dead too? She asked. The man shook his head in the negative. No, he said. Somehow he screwed up, and the bullet never penetrated his skull, though it did damage his face. He's in surgery and will probably spend a few years in a mental hospital, but he'll move on. Without you. Will I ever see him again? She asked. No, the man replied. Before he pulled the trigger, he begged you-know-who for forgiveness, he added, pointing upwards. That kind of thing is very popular up there. So he killed me and gets away with it? She asked. I wouldn't say that, the man shrugged. There will be an investigation, there will be charges, but a good lawyer will defend him, probably citing temporary insanity. After all, he tried to kill himself. Anyone who tries that isn't going to work with a full deck, if you know what I mean. Like I said, he'll spend some time in a rubber room, but will eventually rebuild his life. Unlike you. And what's going to happen to me? She asked. Well, we're not the type to give people what they want, he told her. You can forget spending eternity sleeping with every creature. But we have a nice lake here. It's a little hot, but don't worry. You might get used to it after a few centuries. She looked at him, shocked. What do you mean by that? She asked. He pressed a button on the table, and the floor beneath her opened up. The chair she had been sitting on disappeared, and her robe vanished. She found herself standing, naked, in front of a man who was now looking at her. There was a disgusting odor in the room that reminded her of rotten eggs. There were moans coming from a hole in the floor. What's that? She asked. Well, that's where you'll spend the rest of eternity, he said, with a wicked grin. Welcome to hell! Her eyes widened as she finally realized where she was. He heard her scream as she, naked, dove into the lake of fire. He pressed another button and the floor closed again. Ah, to hear the lamentations of sinners. What a loss, he said, addressing no one in particular. He closed the folder, stood up, and walked out the door to prepare for the next shower. They never learn, he thought. It's okay, he decided. Hell isn't even half full yet.